Hey, welcome to this video where we will be talking about inventories in Godot, which you can add to any type of game. Here you will see a bit of text, right? You can at any moment stop the video to read it. I'm just going to talk around it and then we will move to Godot. Okay, so here I have some forward. What did I want to say? Yes, inventory systems are something that you have to think about for your game. Based on what game you're making, the inventory system will be very different. So you have to think beforehand what you need exactly before you actually try to make it. You can prototype, but the best way is to know exactly what kind of features you need so that you know in what direction you need to go without having to backtrack too much, because refactoring and backtracking can be painful to do. The very first thing that I want to bring to your attention is that when you're making an inventory system, it's absolutely crucial, in my opinion, to separate the UI and the logic. So what this means is that whatever the visual component that you create for the inventory, it should never be responsible for managing that said inventory. Those two things should be separated. So you should have on one hand UI nodes, which are either control nodes or 2D nodes based on what kind of UI you are integrating, but mostly control nodes. And you will have the logic. The logic instead can be added in gray nodes, which are just, I want to say nodes which do nothing besides being nodes, or it can even be in a script that only does this, being an inventory. Here we will use gray nodes for the inventory. The reason for this is because we will use signals, and for signals to be accessible, it is required to use nodes. Okay, so we will be using singleton nodes for the inventory. Here there is a little bit of discussion about using a dictionary versus a list for the data of your inventory. So this is better discussed in the article Data Preferences in the Godot documentation. But basically, it doesn't really matter as long as you pick something you are comfortable working with. If you've used dictionaries a lot, then use dictionaries. If you've only used lists, maybe you won't prefer you'll prefer use lists. It's really up to you. Of course, if you only know one or the other, it's always good to learn the other. But anyway, in this video, we will be using a list because it's the easiest to deal with, and that's what most people know. I made a little thing here about inventories which require coordinates. So I have an actual example of this. Here is a screen of Path of Exile. In Path of Exile, you have those objects which have sizes within the inventory based on the object itself. It is important because it takes several slots, and those slots can actually be translated into gem slots. This is something that you may need, okay? And if this happens, using an array or a dictionary can be a different reasoning for the choice, because when you have a list, the scaling of the list is always linear, right? So you will need to use methods like division, modulus, things like this to get the actual coordinates of each slot, or you can use dictionary, which will give you, well, which will use coordinates as keys, and this way you get the coordinates of the slot within the key, so you don't have to make any calculation. So in this very first video, we will talk about those fundamental features which will be in every inventory. Having the inventory, adding an item, removing an item. This is the standard minimum of an inventory. The reason why I won't expand on other features yet is because other features, even though many of those are considered basic, might not necessarily be required instantly. Because there are some games which actually don't need to move items within the inventory because the inventory is automatically sorted. That's an example. But anyway, here I have a list of features which could come in complementary videos, because people who know my channel, you know I make very long videos. So doing all this in one video, that would be very painful, both to do and to watch. So instead, what I am going to do is start with this fundamental video, and then the other features will be basically made based on requests or random whims from me. All right. I actually made a small summary of what we will do in this episode, so I think I just need to go in this episode 1. There we go. Here is what we will do in this video. We will create a few dummy items, because you may have seen I will not bother with making complicated items. Here we will just use simple items. Then we will create an inventory singleton that will contain everything we need. And then we will end by creating the user interface that will receive that inventory data and will display this data for us to see. Before we jump into Godot, this is the usual website that I go to every time I need icons, because those icons are free and they are very okay. So these are icons that I will use to make items. I will just download a few textures that will be the textures of the items. So you can do basically the same. You can go on that website, use your own assets. Doesn't matter, just grab a few textures, PNG, whatever format you wish. Grab 2 or 3, you don't need very much, just 2 for the testing. That's it. So I am now on Godot with an empty project. I just created a few folders in there, which are the common folders that I used in all my projects. I have assets, components, resources, scenes, scripts, and singletons. We will organize things in there as we progress in the video, so if you don't know what folder contains what content, it's alright, that will be explained when it happens. So first, I wanted to begin by just creating a few items. This will be very simple because the point of this video is not to create items, so we will do the most simple thing possible. We will begin by creating an abstract resource script file. I just created a folder abstracts in my scripts, and in there I created an item script which will be the abstract script for an item resource. All right, let's go. Here we extend resource. This is how you create a resource script. And I used the export tag so that we actually can create those items within the editor, because this is what we will be doing. We will create the items within the editor and not through the script, which is what I usually do. If you, for example, watch the poke clicker thing here, not doing that. Now that we have the abstracts, we can actually go in our resource folder. Here, I will create a subfolder for the items. And in those items, we can now use the create resource and look for the item script that we just created. Now we need to name the new resource. So here I have two images, which are the rusty sword and battle axe. So we will start with the rusty sword, and there we go. In there, when we check this file, we do have now in the inspector on the right the ability to change the name, which is the default that we set in the script, and change the texture. So here we will have the rusty sword with the texture being this one. Okay, I missed my drag, so I'm just gonna quick load it, and actually I'm gonna quick load the right one. There we go. I will duplicate this script and name it battle axe, the second one. All right, so we make sure that we are editing the battle axe script and not the rusty sword, and we change the values. So here we'll have the battle axe, and we will actually change this texture. There we go. Now we have two items, so we can start creating an inventory singleton. I have my own way to make singletons. I have a video about that. If you wish to make autoloads, it works exactly the same. Just you do as you see fit, but I will be doing the singleton my way. That's up to you if you want to copy this. Simply going through what I did right now, I created a scene which I named game, and in that game I created a node inventory with the script of the singleton that I just created here. Now that we have the singleton ready, we can actually start populating it. So here I actually intended to just make the inventory and the basic methods right away. So in order to store the data of the inventory, as I said, we're going to use a list. So at the moment, I will just use a variable which I'm going to name content, and that will be an array of item. And at the moment, it's going to be initialized as an empty array. For the purpose of this video, I will make a 5x3 inventory, which makes 15 slots. So I will just have a variable max size. I'm making this a variable and not a constant because I imply that this value in some games can change, right? The size of the inventory may increase. In that case, I make this an integer, right? And I will initialize it to 15. There is one thing we need to do, the array I created is empty. I actually need to have the array already created somehow. So what I will do is just create a simple function that will create 15 empty slots within that inventory. Empty slots being visualized by null values. This is how it looks like. We just loop through 15 values and we create empty values within that. We have the inventory empty. So we need to create two methods, one to add items and one to remove items. So let's start with the function that creates one item. And what we will do is simply specify in argument what item we want to be added to the list. So here, as we can see, we already need to know in what slot exactly we want to create that item. In order for this to be found, we actually need to create something that will find an empty slot within the inventory. So I'm going to create a new function that returns the first empty slot of the inventory. Here, this function will return an integer that will be the index of the first empty slot. However, we have the situation where no empty slot exists within that inventory. So what we will do in that situation, we will instead return the value -1 so that anyone who tries to get the empty slot will be able to understand that there is none because the value is negative, which should not happen within a list. There is our foo method. Very simple how it works. We loop through a number which is defined by the max size of the inventory. Then, for each item, for each index, we will check within the content of the inventory if this is an item or if it is null. Then we will return the index if we find something, or if we find nothing, the ultimate solution is to return -1. So now we can go back to our method which adds item and change this slot value by this first empty slot thing. Now we actually need to make a check. Is the slots that we found available or not? So we just check that if we have something which is inferior to 0, then we basically abort the mission. Of course, we could have error handling, but that's not really the point here. We're just going to return and drop the action, whatever it was. So now we should actually be able to start the game and watch the Singleton and observe a list of 15 items where they are all null. Okay, so this is what we have. We have the inventory Singleton here, and we do have a list of 15 null items within it. So this is good. Now we can, in the ready method, add a line that will basically create an item based on one of the items we have. Here I use the load method because I'm not going to use database something to get the items on the side. I'm just going to load the items right when I need to add them to the game. So here we will start by adding a rusty sword, for example, and that's it. We can now start the game again and check if we do have this item within the inventory. Okay, so I actually made a very stupid mistake. I checked if the content of the cell was of the type item, instead of checking if the item was null. So that was a very stupid mistake, but it's okay. We just have to check the condition to find the first empty slot to check that it is null, because even if it is null, it is a list of items, so of course it's going to be an item. So this is a mistake that's actually good to know, because making this kind of checks, it can avoid bugs. That's something which is interesting to know. So anyway, we do have in the remote, in our inventory, we do have the object here, which is, weirdly enough, default and null. Okay, now it is a rusty wood. So I don't know what happened, but I didn't change anything. I just restarted the game and checked again, and there is the rusty wood. So anyway, we do have the rusty wood added to the list. So now what I'm gonna do is I will add the battle axe, and then we will also work on the remove method. Now we do have the battle axe in. So what I want to test is if we can add a remove method that will remove an item and remove the rusty wood from the inventory and have the first slot empty, and then the next one being the battle axe. For the remove item method, we can use two ways to do that. We can either use a method that uses an index to remove an item, or a method that uses an item to remove an item. So it's actually very easy to remove an item with the index. That's it. So I forgot about this, but in GDScript you can't have the same method name for two methods with different arguments. This is something that you can do in some languages, but here it looks like we can't. So we're just gonna rename the remove item at index. We're gonna remove the first one into remove at item at index, so it makes sense. And now we do have those two methods. For the second one, remove item, we may want to have some error handling to basically notify anyone who's asking if there is really this item existing and yes, it's been removed, or if the item wasn't found and couldn't be removed, right? That could be a thing that you add to this method. So now we have added our two items, and we will remove at index. We will remove at index 0 because we want to remove the rusty wood. Okay, so here we have the array. The first index is empty. That's good. And the second one shows the battle axe. That's cool too. Let's try something different. I will add another battle axe and remove then a battle axe. So we should be able to see if the first battle axe, which is the second item, is going to be removed properly. Okay, so here we created 3 items and then removed 1 battle axe, and we do have this object here, which should be a rusty wood, and we can go back in the inventory to go check if we do have a battle axe in the slot 3, which is the case. Perfect. So here we have the inventory functioning. So we do have those methods which allow us to add items or remove items. I don't think we will create things like moving items yet, because that's not so necessary and we actually need to go jump within the interface of that. Right there, I create a simple control node that will represent the view that shows the inventory. And what I will do is make it a center container so that we do have the inventory in the middle of that object. And then we will add a grid that will display the inventory. As for the grid, I told you already that I want a 5 by 3 inventory, so here I will set this up to have 5 columns. I'm going to save this scene, and then I will go into making another scene, which is going to represent the inventory slot that we will create each time we have a slot to display, basically. Okay, so here the inventory slot is saved within the component folder because it is not a scene as in a view, but it is a scene as in a component that's meant to be duplicated a lot. So here, for this component, I will just make it a panel, right? So that's just going to be a simple small panel. I will position it with a default anchor to center and give it a minimum size of 64 by 64. So this is our inventory slot. Now, within this, I will just add a small margin, which will make a difference between the border and the texture, and then I will add the texture to that slot. Right. So here we do have the texture of the item ready and the margin, and that's all right. So now I will create a script that will be the script of the component that we will use when we actually create it. Okay, so what we need for this inventory slot, two things. First, we need the slot to be aware of its index, okay? Second, we need the slot to be aware of what item it is currently displaying. So we will just create two properties for those things. Right, I actually made a mistake, but it's alright. We have the index, we have the item. Now the second thing that I'm going to do, which is probably why I made the mistake, I will actually get the reference to the texture rectangle because that's something that we will be using. So I usually like to grab the reference at the creation of the script so that we can use it not as a get node, but as a reference. Okay, so now when the slot is getting ready, we do grab the texture rectangle reference so that we can update it when we need. Now that we have the slot, we actually want it to be able to display its content. The way we are going to do this is to basically use a reload method that will be reloading the cell or the slot in order to update whatever information it should contain, and then update everything that is relative to this information being changed. So I'm going Alright, so what we have here in this method is, first, when we reload, we actually want to get the current item in a slot in the inventory. So we grab that information. Then we actually make two simple updates. First, we update the texture. So if there is an item, we update the texture with the texture of the item. And if there is no item, then we want the texture to be null. As for the tooltip text, we want to add the name of the item if there's one, and if there's none, we remove any previous tooltip there could have been. So this is it for the inventory slot. Now we can go back to the InventoryUI, and here we will actually now be able to create the slots, and here we need two things. We need to basically generate the 15 cells, and we also need for that to get the reference of the grid container so we can add the cells to the grid. Okay, now that we have the grid, we actually need to initialize the slots for every slot in the inventory. So we do have a scene to instantiate, and we do have an inventory that we need to scan, sort of. So we do have all the slots being instantiated when we basically have the user interface being loaded, but we will actually just bring this scene within the game now. So we do have our scenes, well, the scenes, InventoryUI, we add this to the game, and we can start the game, and we should have the 15 slots. Now that we have the slots appearing, we actually need to call on this reload method when it is necessary. So this happens at two different occasions. First, when we create the slots. So here, when we actually have the nodes, we do want to reload. We want to reload when the slot is appearing so that it gets the texture. Okay. I forgot to actually add the index when making the node here. So yeah, I forgot to add the index, so each item had the index 0, which was unfortunate, right? So we have the rusty sword here and the battle axe here. There is a slight problem though. Here, the slots basically don't update when the inventory is being modified. So we actually need our inventory here to have a way to tell the interface to update based on its content. So there are different ways to do that, I guess. So you can, at every frame of the game, have every inventory slots updating, if that is what you want to do. It's actually very easy. All you have to do is, in the process method, add the reload here. But this is not how I like to do things. I usually work with signals, which is what I'm going to show you because that's in my opinion, the best way to do that. Here we will just create a signal inventory updated. Of course, there's a way to have this even more optimized by having all the having different signals based on what changed. For example, we could have not the signal inventory updated, but rather have a slot updated so that only the constant slot does update. That could be an example. Or, well, we could just at the moment deal with only this signal because that's clearly enough for what we're doing. So this signal, inventory updated, should happen and be emitted when we add items or remove items. So we're just going to emit that signal when it's there. We have the signals emitted. Now we do need to watch on the signals for the slots to update. Because we actually update all the inventory slots at once when there's an update, I will have this method being watched by the inventory user interface, and this is the one who will trigger the reload method of all the slots. Right, so here we connect the signal coming from the inventory to the method inventory updated. If you don't know how signals work, I do have a video about that, so there will be something at the top right now, so if you want to check that. Otherwise, here we now do need to reload all the slots. The way we are going to achieve this is by getting all the children within the grid container, and for each children we will trigger their reload method. Just a simple check to be sure that we are working with inventory slots. We check that we have the right type, and then we trigger the reload. So right now, nothing should have changed based on what we did earlier, but we will just add a simple button at the bottom somewhere to add an item so that we can see what happens when we add items to the list. Okay, so now we should be able just to see what happens when we add items. We can add one item here and then to the next slot. Right, this is brilliant. Okay, so anyway, this is everything I will show you in this video because it's already long enough. I will show you again the list of features which can go with an inventory. Here we have the additional features that we can see in future videos, so I might decide to do those on my own, or you can say, oh, I really want this one because that's important for my game. If there are requests, they will be considered first if they do not rely on other features in this list. So anyway, you get the point. I hope you like this episode and that you're looking forward to have more episodes in this inventory topic. And yeah, that's it for me, and you take care. I'll see you later.